It was that moment. The feeling of something solid touching me enough to take my breath away. In the brief moment when lightning brightly illuminated the wall, a shiver surged up my back. I knew without a word being said why the neighbors said they ran away on the first night, why the elders at the senior center told me to be careful of that house, why Seongmi left those final words, that I should live alone my whole life because of that problem with my younger sibling. Every piece of the puzzle snapped into place with that single shock transmitted to my back. My breath caught, my heart seemed to beat twice and stop, my mind went blank, and fear and a strange fever rose within me at the same time.
I am truly okay. Because of my size, everyone.
So this was real? The rumors weren't just talk. Honestly, I was very surprised at first. Enough to take my breath away. No, even more than that. I understand why people ran away all this time, but I don't feel like doing the same. To be honest, I like you more now than I was surprised back then. The moment I accepted Jingak that night, I faced another truth. That the presence I had felt brush against my back was not imagination, but reality. I realized the reason why people ran away and why he had been alone for 35 years. So clearly that it took my breath away. But strangely, I wasn't afraid. Instead, my heart embraced him first, along with that hard-to-believe truth. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. And please leave a line from where you are listening to this story right now. Your comments create the next story. I was 56 years old when I lost my husband in a car accident 10 years ago and became alone. Since that day, my life had always been lonely like an empty chair, but the reason I could endure it was because my lifelong friend, Jungmi, was by my side. When I heard the news that Seongmi had been hospitalized with cancer, I didn't hesitate for a day, grabbed my bag, and ran to Jecheon General Hospital. Outside the window, something neither snow nor rain was fluttering, and in the hospital corridor, the distinct smell of disinfectant mixed with the cold chill of the winter air. As I opened the door and walked in, Seongmi's hollowed-out eyes moved very slowly toward me. "Jung, are you here?" Her voice wasn't the Seongmi from the noisy cafes where we used to talk, but as light as a sheet of paper fluttering in the breeze. "Of course I came. Did you think I would stay still when you were sick without even telling me? I forced a smile, pretending to be okay, but I felt as if a piece of my heart was being torn away little by little. Seongmi stroked the back of my hand and smiled weakly. "My doctor told me I don't have much time left." Tears welled up at those words, but I forced myself not to cry. Crying in front of a friend at the very end would be cruel. I wonder how long we held hands like that. The quiet hum of hospital machines played in the background, and Seongmi's breathing grew thinner. Then, suddenly, Seongmi gripped my hand a little tighter. Her expression seemed to say she was gathering her last bit of strength to speak. "Jung, please meet my younger brother one day." The air in the room felt as if it had frozen at that moment. "Why? What are you saying all of a sudden? We've barely ever talked about our siblings." Seongmi caught her trembling breath and continued, in a very small voice. "He's lived alone his whole life because of that problem. The women all run away." The end of the sentence was barely audible, but I heard it clearly. That problem. It was a heavy secret word that I couldn't quite grasp. "What problem is it?" Seung-mi, what is it? I asked urgently, but Seung-mi let out a long, labored breath and shook her head. I can't tell you now, you'll find out later. Later. Promise me you'll meet him. Her eyes were desperate, and there was even a hint of fear in them. I wanted to ask more, but I could feel the warmth slowly leaving her hand. Okay, I promise. Seung-mi, I will definitely meet him. Don't worry. As I said that, Seung-mi smiled ever so slightly, and with that smile remaining on her lips, Seung-mi let out her final breath. Only the sound of machines remained in the room, and I couldn't let go of her hand for a long time. The last words left by my friend of 40 years, Seung-mi. He lived alone his whole life because of that problem. What on earth could it have meant? What was it that she wanted to hide so badly? It was the next day that I held her funeral and began sorting through the things I'd brought home from the hospital. As I took off my coat and opened the box, the smell of old paper and long-buried memories slowly began to spread. And inside I discovered a very worn, small notebook. Seung-mi's funeral ended much more quietly than I had expected. She didn't have a husband or any children. I stood there blankly for a long time, smelling the incense drifting peacefully before her portrait. Seung-mi, why were you alone until the very end? There were words welling up in my chest, but I couldn't bring myself to say them. When the funeral was over, and people left one by one, I carefully loaded her belongings into my car. Her final words, please meet my younger brother. Only this sentence kept echoing in my mind. I returned home and started opening the boxes one by one. Clothes, old towels, medicine bags, and a few faded books. They were so simple and quiet that it was hard to believe they were traces of Seung-mi. Then, at the bottom of a box, I found a small-looking brown notebook. The cover was bright, and the edges were frayed, but for some reason, I reached for it first. I felt as if the real story Seung-mi left for me last was hidden inside. The moment I opened the notebook, my heart felt like it had dropped. It was because of the writing on the first page. Jin-guk failed again. Again, the woman ran away, crying on the first night. I couldn't turn the page for a long while. Jin-guk, the name Seung-mi kept mentioning until her final moment. That brother of hers was. Because of that problem, he lived his whole life alone. Seung-mi's last words came to mind clearly. I gathered my courage and turned to the next page. Records from a long time ago. 35 years ago, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, and the recurring phrases in between. Today the woman ran away again. They say the child left crying. How was he born with such a body? I am sorry on your behalf. Seung-mi's handwriting grew blurred, and at some point, it even looked shaky and crooked. The last diary entry read like this: Jin-guk is a kind boy, but that part of him is so big that everyone is afraid. The women just cry in shock and eventually all run away. What should I do about my brother? The moment I read that sentence, my breath caught in my throat. The talk of losing women wasn't just a metaphor. He was a man who truly missed out on love, marriage, and life for 35 years because of that. I felt like I could finally understand a little why Seung-mi spoke as if she were entrusting her brother to me, until the very end. But on the other hand, it was hard to believe. Could a story like this actually exist in the world? But Why did Sungmi have to entrust that task to me right before she died? I couldn't even close the diary, leaving it on my lap, unable to move for a long time. Outside the window, the wind was blowing fiercely. It felt as if Sungmi's final sigh had come to linger by my side on the wind. Young-ah, you'll know later. Her last voice echoed deep in my ears once again. I carefully folded the notebook and slowly stood up. Whatever the reason, he was the brother Sungmi had kept in her heart her whole life. No matter who he was or what he carried, I knew I had to go see him in the end. And the next day I was searching for the time of the first train to Jumunjin. I arrived in Jumunjin just as the morning sun was beginning to seep over the sea. The wind was cold, and the sea rippled gently as if holding the chill of winter. Standing before the train station, gripping the handle of my suitcase, the scent of the sea suddenly rushed in, sharp and intense. In that moment, for some reason, a heavy feeling settled in my chest. Am I really doing the right thing, gonna meet Seongmi's brother, Kader? The phrases in the notebook kept echoing in my mind. She ran away because of that place. He lived alone for 35 years. Those faded records with dates scribbled on them. The weight of every word held me back for a moment, but I eventually moved toward the beach, step by step, step. When I took out the note with the address and stood at the entrance of the alley, the house immediately caught my eye. An old one-story house with white paint peeling in places, a small but tidy yard, and a short wall blocking the wind from the sea. A towel hung on that wall, swaying in the sunlight, looking strangely lonely. As if the time lived in that house were hanging in the breeze, I caught my breath once more, raised my hand and pressed the doorbell. The chime was small, but its resonance shook my heart deeply. I heard the door open, and I looked up. There stood a man. He was taller than I expected, looking neat in a black knit sweater. There were streaks of gray in his hair, but he looked much younger than his early 60s. But the moment I looked into his eyes, I felt something very strange. A gaze so deep and heavy, hard to believe for his age, like that of someone who had endured a long life all alone. Someone carrying a burden they could tell no one about. Someone who had lived with loneliness for a long time. Even after just one look into his eyes, I knew why Seongmi was worried about this brother, until her very last moment. "Excuse me, are you Beijing gak?" I spoke to him cautiously. The man looked at me for a moment, then nodded, very slowly. "Yes." "But who are you?" His voice was low and calm. It was the kind of voice that strangely settled my heart the moment I heard it. "My name is Yeonjung. I'm a friend of Seongmi." Upon hearing that, his expression wavered just ever so slightly. Surprise, sadness, and an unspeakable emotion crossed his face. "I heard that my sister passed away." His voice trembled slightly at the end. I nodded and answered, "Yes, she was worried about you until the very end." A brief silence followed. In that moment, the sea breeze swept between us, and it felt as if deep shadows were spilling from his eyes. "Please come in." He opened the door quietly. The inside of the house was much tidier than I had expected. Books were neatly organized on the wooden shelf, and a half-drunk cup of coffee sat on the small table. While I could sense the the loneliness typical of a home where someone lives alone, there was also a strange, tidy warmth to it. What exactly did Seongmi tell you at the end? When Jin-guk asked that slowly, my heart skipped a beat. That question, that wait, could we talk about that later? He studied my expression for a moment before silently nodding his head. The faint scent of coffee lingered in the air, and within it his gaze kept coming back to me, Hisha Tai. Seeing the dark depth in the eyes of a man who had spent more days enduring life alone than living it, my heart felt strangely stirred. And then I realized this meeting today would certainly not be the end of it. When I stepped out of Jin-guk's house, the sea breeze felt much colder. My face looked fine, but my heart felt strangely troubled. I had only just met this stranger, yet a strange sense of comfort seeped in as if I'd known him for a long time, while at the same time, an inexplicable heaviness weighed on my chest. What is this? I asked myself, but no answer came. Normally, after meeting someone, I would just head back, but that day my steps kept pulling me toward the sea. The gently breaking waves, the salt-tinged breeze, the low-hanging winter sunlight. The entire scene held me in a strange grip. Jin-guk's gaze kept surfacing in my mind. A depth hard to believe for someone younger, and the loneliness forged by a life spent alone. That kept shaking my heart. And strangely, the fact that he had lived his life alone hurt more to think about. It felt as if the moment Seongmi's request was placed on my shoulders, he had already taken a place in my heart. Just see him today and leave. I walked slowly along the shore, trying to soothe myself with those words. But deep inside, I heard a completely different voice. I don't want to go back. I want to stay just a little longer today. The moment that thought filled my mind, I found myself heading toward a nearby real estate office without even realizing it. Inside the office sat a middle-aged woman bundled in a thick padded jacket. As I opened the door, she stood up with a bright smile. Are you looking for a studio apartment? At her question, I nodded, surprised at how naturally the motion came to me. Yes, I was thinking of staying for a little while. I have one right by the beach. It's off-season, so there are plenty of rooms. The woman pointed toward the sea, and I followed her without even knowing why. Past the alleyways where the winter sun shone coldly at the end of the road, where the waves were visible. A small studio building was standing there. As I entered the room, the scent of a warm electric blanket and the sunlight filled the entire space. The place where opening the window lets the sound of the waves rush right in. It was that very moment. A tiny resonance dropped into my heart. Why not stay here for a few days? At first, I fooled myself with the word few days, but the answer was already decided. Honestly, I didn't know why my hands were shaking when I opened the contract and held the pen. I had only planned to say hello and leave, yet in just a few hours, I was renting a room near that man's house. It really was absurd. But the moment I turned away, an inexplicable sense of relief seeped into one corner of my heart. What is this? I muttered quietly and walked along the beach again. The winter sun was dazzling, and the waves were quiet, but my heart was beating strangely fast. I didn't quite know what emotion was hiding behind that pounding, but the sea before me was clearly telling me something. There is work left to do here. It is not time to leave yet. When I entered the studio apartment, put down my bag, and sat down, today suddenly felt so surreal. In the morning I had just come to check on my friend's final request, and now, before evening, I had settled down here. I had settled down here. Outside the window, the sea turned a dark color. In that darkness, I strangely felt as if I could see someone's back. The image of Bae-jin-guk watching the sea alone. That loneliness kept pulling at my heart. And the next morning I would hear strange rumors about Jin-guk in a very unexpected place. On my first night in Jumunjin, I lay in my seaside studio apartment and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The sound of the waves came in a steady rhythm, which oddly calmed me, but at the same time, a strange anxiety kept rising from deep inside. Perhaps it was because I knew the reason, but didn't want to admit it. Knowing that all those feelings started from the name Bae-jin-guk, I went to a nearby restaurant the next morning for brunch. It was a small place, and the locals seemed to know each other. I was sitting by the window waiting for kimchi stew when the owner, a middle-aged woman, placed a water cup on my table and glanced at me as she spoke. "Are you traveling?" Just for a bit." "Where are you staying?" For some reason, I wanted to be vague, but I answered honestly, "A studio apartment by the beach. The one near 300. Her expression immediately hardened. Then one side of her lip slowly curled downward. "Oh my, if it's near that house." Her tone was so meaningful that I put down my chopsticks. "Why? Is there a problem?" The owner glanced around and lowered her voice. "That's where Bae-jin-guk lives, "Yes, that's right." The lady looked around once more and leaned in close to my ear. "Be careful of that house." Her voice was firm. I felt as if my heart had skipped a beat. I wanted to deny it, but I felt the stories I'd read in the notebook yesterday creeping into my mind. "Why should I be careful?" As I asked with difficulty, the lady let out a deep sigh. "Long ago, a bride ran away in horror on her wedding night." "She ran away?" "Yes. They said she was crying, and that screams were heard from that house. She was so terrified that she bolted. There's something about that man." I suddenly felt like I couldn't breathe. The story of a woman running away on her wedding night. That very rumor was exactly what was written in Sungmi's notebook. The moment I realized it wasn't just idle gossip, I felt a chill run through my entire body. The lady continued, "He may look normal on the outside, but you never know what a man is truly like. There's a reason he's lived alone all this time. So, don't get attached and be careful." Those words echoed in my head for a long time. Don't get attached, be careful. This was probably the first time in my life I had ever been warned to be careful of someone. As I left the restaurant, I heard two local women whispering. I heard that person over there also rented a room near Jin-guk's house. I don't know why they're doing that. If it were me, I'd never go there. Do you still remember the story of the bride who ran away crying? It was horrible. They continued talking, unaware that I was listening. But I couldn't help but stop and listen to every word. My heart kept sinking. That sentence written in the notebook, the restaurant lady's warning, the townspeople's gossip. As the pieces clicked into place, the stories I had dismissed as impossible felt like a finished puzzle. On the way back to my room, The sea breeze was so cold it stung my face. My mind was complicated and somehow anxious, yet Jin-guk's face kept coming to mind. That deep sad look in his eyes from yesterday. It was because that gaze was so different from all those rumors. Is it really true? Even as I asked myself, an unresolved feeling shook my heart. That night, rain clouds began to gather in the sky. Outside the window it grew darker, and the wind grew stronger. And on that very night, as the rain poured down, I ended up taking shelter in Jin-guk's house. Whether by coincidence or fate, the word downpour didn't even begin to describe it. The wind and rain were so powerful that they seemed to push against the house, making my hand slip when I grabbed the window. Even the studio apartment was trembling. Living by the sea, rainy days are common. But that night was different. I had a feeling something big was about to happen. It didn't sound like raindrops. It sounded like the entire ocean was pouring down. I was so scared that I ran out of the house, not even able to open my umbrella properly. Where was I headed, you ask? My feet moved on their own. The place I chose before my own will was Jin-guk's house. When I reached the door, the rain was bone-chilling and my hands were shaking so hard. I didn't even know if I should ring the bell. But at that moment, the door clicked open. "Jung-hee," he said, as if he had been waiting. His voice clear, even through the storm. I don't know why that one word, brushing past my face, felt so warm. I couldn't say anything and just went inside his house. Inside the room, unlike the outside, it was quiet and warm. Then suddenly the power went out. In an instant, the living room was plunged into darkness, and thunder roared outside. "Wait a moment, I'll go get a flashlight." Jin-guk turned around. I was startled, stepped back, and my wet feet slipped, causing me to lose my balance. For a moment, I felt my body twist in the air. And the next second, as if pulled by someone, I fell straight into Jin-guk's arms and that was the moment. Even through his clothes, I felt something so solid against my back that it took my breath away. In the split second, a lightning flash lit up the walls. A shiver ran up my spine. I knew it without having to be told. Why the neighbors said she ran away on the first night, why the elders at the community center warned me to be careful of that house, and why Seong-mi left those final words about her brother having to live alone. All the puzzle pieces fell into place with that single shock transmitted to my back. Tifak. My breath caught, my heart seemed to skip beats, my mind went blank, and a mix of fear and a strange heat rose within me. Jin-guk hastily pulled his hands from my shoulders with a startled look. I'm sorry. "I didn't mean to," he said, his face flushing deep red, standing there at a loss. It was the first time I had seen such fluster from him, usually so reticent. I gripped my towel tightly and said in a trembling voice, "It's okay. I'm really okay." At those words, he seemed even more flustered, avoiding my gaze and quietly bowing his head. "Jung-hee, you were startled, weren't you?" His voice was that of someone who had been hurt all his life and was afraid of being hurt again. I slowly shook my head, but my heart was still racing. "No, I wasn't startled. I just finally understood a little. Why you've had such a hard time all this while. At those words he paused for a moment. He took a deep breath as if to steady himself, then finally looked my way. Jung-hee. His voice trembled as he spoke my name for the first time. That rumor, if it's true what you felt just now, is exactly what I've never been able to tell anyone for 35 years. His words were quieter than the wind, yet they fell into the room heavier than thunder. Jinga couldn't find the words for a long time. Even with the rain shaking the whole house, his silence was louder and heavier than that. I fidgeted with the edge of the blanket, waiting for his lips to part. His every breath felt more intense in this moment than the shock I'd felt behind my back earlier. Jung-hee. He called my name quietly. It was a cautious tone, like someone granted permission to say words they had never uttered in their entire life. The truth is, he glanced out the window and took a long, deep breath. Do you think I only ran away from the woman I was set up with once? His shoulders trembled ever so slightly. It was 3 times. I held my breath. He continued speaking. 29, 32, 35. All 3 times were for the same reason. On the first night, when they saw... He couldn't finish his sentence and lowered his head. They were terrified. Lightning flashed across the window, briefly illuminating his face. And in that expression, I could read all the reasons why he had been alone for 35 years. I never once thought of something that big as a point of pride. If anything, it's been a curse my whole life. His words came slowly, but they sank in so deeply. My mother always worried about it when she was alive. She wondered if I would live alone forever, but how could I accept a blind date when I'm like this? He clenched his hands tightly on his lap until his knuckles turned ghostly white. So I finally gave up, deciding that love and marriage just weren't meant for me. By the time his confession ended, my throat was already tight with emotion. Jin-guk spoke while watching the rain outside. For me to hold someone, or for someone to hold me, Jung-hee, you are truly the first. Yuaxia Chaya. At those words, my heart tightened with a strange aching sting. Do you know how scared I was when you flinched in surprise earlier? He smiled quietly, but that smile was steeped in a very old, deep sorrow. Afraid of running away again, afraid of being hurt again, afraid of being left alone again. He shivered slightly without lifting his head, and in that moment, I realized with my whole being that he hadn't been alone, just because of his size, but because of his wounds. Jung-hee, are you really not going to leave? His trembling question felt hotter than the hand holding me. Without realizing it, I placed my hand on his shoulder. Jin-guk, I wasn't scared. My voice trembled too. I was surprised, but strangely it felt warm. He looked at me as if his breath had stopped upon hearing that. I haven't said this to anyone in 35 years. As I smiled carefully, the corners of his eyes grew damp. So, if Jung-ah could stay by my side even for a little while. He hesitated, biting his lip. Then he barely managed to let it out. I feel like I'm alive. The moment he said that, I finally fully understood how deeply he had been trapped. he had been trapped. This confession was a greater shock than the sensation brushing against my back. And just then, my phone vibrated. It was my son. A wave larger than the storm began to crash over my heart. The phone was vibrating violently on the table. Even amidst the downpour, the sound felt exceptionally loud. My hands were shaking so much I couldn't press the screen properly, but I answered it. Mom, where are you right now? My son's voice was sharp from the start. I held my breath for a moment. I'm in Jumunjin. A moment of silence passed. Then his voice exploded. Jumunjin? Why? To meet someone. I couldn't answer. I knew that the moment I spoke, my son's reaction would be even fiercer. But he spoke as if he already knew. It's because of that man, isn't it? Mom, you barely pick up lately, and it's only been a few years since Dad passed, and it's a younger man too. That hit my heart harder than the sound of the sky collapsing. I spoke cautiously. Jinguk is not that kind of person. He is a truly good man. A good man? How many times have you even seen him to call him a good man? My son's breathing was completely ragged, and I felt like a criminal with every word. Mom, do you not realize Dad's photo is still at home? How could you? Don't compare him to Dad. I cut him off in a trembling voice. But my son didn't stop. A younger man your age? Are you really that oblivious as to why he's being nice to you? At that moment, my hands shook so hard I could barely hold the phone. He said this at the very end. Mom, come home right now. Right now. Cut all contact with that person immediately, Lee. And then the call was unilaterally disconnected. I stood there speechless for a long while, looking out at the rainy window. The whole world seemed to be blurring. That was when Jinguk approached me cautiously from behind. Are you all right? His voice was low and careful. He was more nervous than I was. I forced a smile and said, It's my son. He seems quite shocked. As soon as he heard my answer, Jinguk lowered his head very slowly. And he said in a small voice, I must be a burden, right? No, you're not. That's not what I meant. But instead of cutting me off, he wore an expression that looked like a smile, but held no joy at all. Jung-hee, if I stay by your side, I think things will only get harder for you. My heart sank at once. Then don't say that. I gripped the back of my hand tightly, but Jinguk shook his head firmly. I've never said anything like this before, but honestly, I was scared. Avoiding my gaze, he continued to speak while looking at the floor. You heard what your son said, Jung-hee. I'm afraid that being with someone like me will make you suffer criticism, judgment about our age gap, and pain. His hands were trembling. I'm fine. I spoke up, almost out of stubbornness. But he kept his head down and said quietly, You might say, You're fine. But your son cares about you more than anyone else. Those words hurt even more, because it was the truth. A moment later, Jinguk spoke very quietly, as if making a vow to himself. I'll step back a little before things get any harder for you. Those words struck my heart harder than thunder or rain. Jinguk, don't do that. My feelings matter too, I said in a trembling voice, but he forced a smile. Your life comes before your feelings, Jung-hee. And then he pulled his hand away from mine, ever so slightly. In that moment, it felt as if something inside my heart had shattered into pieces. I couldn't say a word. Yet, the sight of him quietly stepping away was lonelier than ever, and it made me realize more clearly than before that he was someone I didn't want to lose. Gausi? And in that very moment, I knew that I had to be the one to make the next move. The sound of the door closing echoed louder than a storm. At the moment Jin-guk was quietly trying to move away from me, I was left standing there, breathless and unable to speak. But my feet moved first. Jin-guk. My voice was already drenched in tears. He turned back slowly. Under the dim light, his face wavered between determination and resignation. I took one step, then two, toward him. And tears I could no longer hold back fell from my chin. You pulling away from me is 100 times more terrifying than what people say or what my son thinks. Or what my son thinks. As soon as the words left my lips, I was surprised by my own sincerity. Jin-guk stood frozen as if he had stopped breathing. I swallowed my tears and continued speaking. Since losing my husband, I haven't held anyone's for nearly 10 years. I know all too well how terrifying it is to rely on someone. I truly know it. My throat ached from the tears. But the thought of you stepping away from my side is even more terrifying and unbearable. He didn't say a word for a long time. He just stared at my face, as if he were someone unable to breathe. Jung-hee. That one word echoed through my entire body. I reached out and grabbed his hand. I held his trembling hand as I spoke. Don't be ashamed. Don't think of it as a wound. Who you are standing before me now matters more to me than who you were in the past. At those words, Jin-guk's eyes grew moist. He bit his lip tightly and said in a softly trembling voice, "This is the first time in my life I've heard words like that." The moment his hand gripped mine back, its warmth explained everything. Everything. I leaned into his chest for a moment and he silently wrapped his arms around my back. In his embrace, the earlier rumors, my son's words, and the downpour outside all faded away. But then, the door suddenly burst open. It was my son. Soaking wet from the rain, he rushed in, violently. A heavy silence fell over us. My son gasped for air, looking back and forth between Jin-guk and me. His eyes looked as if he might drag me out of there, right then and there, right then. I reached out and took my son's hand first. Stop it. Just listen to what he has to say before you judge. My son gritted his teeth, but he hesitated when he saw that my tears hadn't dried. Yet. Just then, Jin-guk walked toward my son, very quietly. I'd want to be a burden to Jung-hee, and I don't want to hurt her either. His voice was shaky, but it was sincere. My son narrowed his eyes at those words and stayed silent for a long time. "Mister," my son said, his voice rough but somehow drained of strength. "Do you like my mother?" Jin-guk took his time. thinking deeply before answering, with all his heart. Yes. It is the most honest feeling I have. Those words resonated more deeply than a thunderclap. My son let out a long breath. I couldn't tell if it was a sigh or a sob, and gave a small nod. Let's just sit down and talk. The moment he said that, I was overwhelmed by a mix of relief and fear. It felt like the real beginning of what we were about to build. After my son left, the house was as quiet as a beach after a storm has passed. Jin-guk stood there cautiously, neither approaching me nor moving away. I was sitting in silence when I suddenly met his gaze. That moment was the beginning. Quietly, very slowly, I reached out my hand. And in that brief touch as he took my hand, it felt as if something long suppressed was being released from both of us at once. Jung-hee. His voice was much lower than usual, thick with breath. Though no words were spoken, we were thinking the same thing. I pulled his hand, drawing him closer to me. A warm heat which I hadn't even felt on that rainy night spread to envelop my entire body. We leaned into each other and embraced slowly, and the moment his arms wrapped around my shoulders, my heart gave a heavy thud. My heart gave a heavy thud. Our breaths touched. His voice trembled as he called my name, and through his touch, brushing my hand, shoulder, and waist, I felt a living sensation I had forgotten for 10 years. And it was in that moment, the truth I didn't know back then, which had only brushed past me, now approached to envelop me more closely and clearly. A presence so heavy and strong that it couldn't be explained in words. I understood clearly in that short moment, with my whole body, why someone had run away, why the rumors began, and why Jin-guk had spent 35 years alone. But I didn't want to run away. No, rather than running, I wanted to be closer to his embrace. His trembling hand held on to me more firmly than any fear. Jin-guk also caught his breath and said in a shaking voice, "Jung-hee, this is why, when I meet anyone, I cut him off and cupped his cheeks." It's okay. I was as sincere as my trembling lips suggested. Maybe there are people who would run away, but I am not afraid of you, of you. As those words fell, his shoulders shook violently, as if a long locked door had finally opened. That night we accepted each other, honestly, quietly, and passionately, forgetting age, wounds, and rumors. In the darkness, with our hands intertwined, our breaths touching, and feeling our hearts beating at the same rhythm, I was sure of one thing. Though this love came late, it is deeper and more complete than any other. The sound of waves crashing outside the window seemed to be silently blessing our resolution. And after that, we made a very important decision. Even calling it a seaside wedding venue, it was really just one large tent and a few rows of white chairs. There were no elaborate floral decorations and no wedding hall lighting. Instead, the wind blew softly and the waves gently wetted our toes like a wedding song. The sun was slowly sinking over the sea, and the sky, blended with sunset glow and soft pink clouds, seemed to quietly bless the new beginning of two people who had waited a long time. A few friends, some neighbors, and my son were sitting quietly in their chairs watching us. My son's gaze rested on me, and in his eyes there was no more opposition or worry. There was only a small smile. To me, that felt greater than any other blessing. Jin-guk stood before me, his hair slightly tousled by the sea breeze. He felt like a stranger, yet also like someone I had known for a very long time. Perhaps it was like that from the very beginning. Jung-hee. The moment he called my name, his voice cracked a little. I looked up with a smile, but I could see his eyes turning red. He couldn't continue what he was saying. He pressed his lips together, once or twice as if biting them, and finally spoke in a voice as soft as a breath. I have never stood before anyone like this in my entire life. It felt as if the wind had momentarily stopped. I wanted to hold on to someone, but I was afraid they would leave if I did. He looked at the back of my hand and continued. Because of that reason, others always talked about what I have. People would see me once and run away. It was as if those words were confirming that it wasn't just a rumor, but a scar. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, and slowly went on. But, Jung-hee, you didn't run away, At that moment, his voice trembled deeply. It's the first time in my life. He lowered his head and slowly caught his breath. You are the first person in my life who saw me and didn't leave. And the moment he finished those words, tears streamed down his eyes. Those tears were a mix of self-reproach, fear, and loneliness. It was as if 35 years of unspoken time were all flowing out at once. Damasiaini at once. Before the tears could fall, I wrapped his hands in both of mine. I could feel his own warmth, neither too hot nor too cold, nor too cold. Jin-guk, I said, looking straight into his eyes. I was afraid every day that you would leave, too. At my words, he slowly lifted his head. His eyes were wet, but there was a clear light within them. So I held his hands even tighter. As if never to let go, I said, let's not let go of each other anymore. As I finished, a breeze swept past and the sunset light stretched our shadows until they were joined together. The guests applauded quietly. My son also laughed out loud for the very first time. Without letting go of my hand, Jin-guk spoke in a voice that trembled slightly. I will protect you for the rest of my life. Those words felt like a vow, a prayer, and a door opening to our new season. And that day, at the seaside wedding hall, we quietly but firmly started our lives over together. After the wedding, I stayed behind and walked along the shore for a while. Light shattered across the sea as the sun dipped low and the waves rolled in and out against our feet like old friends. Jin-guk's life and mine began to bloom not with the fast, hot passion of youth, but like a warmth slowly seeping in. We realized, late in life, that love isn't something reserved only for the young. On our first night back home, Jin-guk sat down beside me, cautious and gentle. We didn't say a word, but it felt as if our hearts were communicating just through our breath. Jung-hee, I don't think I'll be afraid of being alone anymore. His words made my eyes sting before I even knew it. And as the days turned into weeks, his sentiment never changed. I would wake up first every morning, to prepare the grilled mackerel he loved, and he would stand quietly behind me in the sunlit kitchen, wrapping his warm hands around my shoulders. Outside, the sea wore a different face every day, but our hearts grew stronger with each passing day. The neighbors would say, "They say love found later in life runs deeper. You two seem like such a perfect match." They would tell us this so softly. I no longer feared rumors like before, and I didn't sway no matter what anyone said. Because now our hands holding each other were our greatest proof and our most profound language. Sometimes, while we're out walking, Jinguk stops and holds my hand without a word. When I ask, "What is it?" he usually says this. "I never thought a time like this would come for me. I never thought I'd feel the desire to walk side by side with someone again. With those words, a deep warmth would fill my heart. I told him as well. I never knew such a great love would find me. In the final season of my life, though we met late, we never wavered once. Neither the scars we carried, nor the years we had lived, could stand in our way